The gavel came down in thunderous silence, a sound so sharp it seemed to carve the air. Every head in the courtroom snapped forward. Judge Evelyn Marlowe said, "The court is now in session." Daniel Shaw, lead defense attorney, glanced at the trembling witness stand, sweat dotting his brow. Across the aisle, prosecutor Margaret Flynn shifted in her seat, eyes cold as winter glass. Cameras flashed. A hush fell, thicker than stone. Everyone sensed something was about to unravel. In the gallery, Daniel's wife Rachel clutched her hands, knuckles white. Beside her, their son Lucas, just 9, pressed against her side. "Daddy's going to fix everything," Rachel whispered, though she barely believed it. Daniel's heart hammered. He could not afford a single mistake. The accused, Martin Ridge, stared at Daniel, hope and dread mixed in his face. Suddenly, a creak, a file was dropped. Margaret said, "We submit new evidence, Your Honor." The bailiff crossed the floor, a sealed envelope in hand. Daniel's pulse quickened. This was not part of the plan. The entire courtroom held its breath. The judge's gaze pierced the silence as the envelope landed on her bench. Daniel's mind raced, piecing together what this could mean. Margaret said, "Your Honor, this evidence was discovered late last night. It directly impacts the integrity of the defendant's alibi." Daniel gripped the edge of his table, knuckles white, every muscle in his jaw clenched. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as the words hung over the room. The bailiff sliced open the envelope, revealing glossy photographs and a stack of typed pages. Judge Marlowe flipped through them, her brows tightening with each page. Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his ears. If this evidence was genuine, it could dismantle his entire case. He locked eyes with Martin, who mouthed, "What's happening?" Margaret watched, cool and unblinking. In that moment, Daniel realized the stakes had changed. The battle had begun, not for justice, but for survival. The courtroom waited, suspended, for the next blow. Judge Marlowe said, "Let the record show the prosecution's submission of new evidence." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to Daniel, testing for a reaction. Daniel's lips tightened as he rose to his feet. He said, "Objection, Your Honor. The defense was not notified in advance. This blindsides our ability to prepare." Margaret replied, "The evidence was only just recovered, Your Honor. The law demands truth, not convenience." Daniel swallowed hard, gaze darting to the jury. Some looked away, others stared back, hungry for drama. The judge nodded. "Objection noted. We will proceed with caution." Daniel sat heavily, shoulders caving in. He sensed the ground shifting beneath him. In the gallery, Rachel drew Lucas close. The courtroom's tension grew thick, almost suffocating. Daniel's mind spun, every plan unraveling, every hope turning to dread. The betrayal wasn't just legal. It was personal. He stared at Margaret, wondering just how deep this would cut. Rachel felt every word like a blow. She said softly, "Hold on, Lucas. Daddy's fighting." Lucas gripped her hand tighter, eyes fixed on his father, confusion and fear battling across his face. The murmurs of the crowd filled the gallery, punctuated by the soft click of a reporter's camera. Daniel slumped into his chair, hands trembling beneath the table. Margaret sat stone-faced, one brow arched in silent challenge. Judge Marlowe pored over the new documents, lips pressed thin, glasses glinting in the fluorescent light. Every player in the room was locked in a private storm. Daniel glanced at Rachel, saw the hope in her eyes flicker. For a split second he remembered their promise, to always trust, to never hide the truth. But now, truth felt like the enemy. The courtroom's heavy air threatened to suffocate. Rachel whispered, "You can do this." But Daniel wasn't sure. The battle lines had been drawn, and everyone sensed that nothing would ever be the same. As Judge Marlowe raised a hand to silence the murmurs, Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the walls closing in. "Mr. Shaw, are you prepared to proceed?" she asked. Daniel nodded, voice hoarse, "Yes, Your Honor." Margaret offered a tight, victorious smile, and Daniel caught it, a flicker of something more than rivalry. It was as if she knew exactly where this was going, and he did not. The gallery leaned in, breaths held. Rachel pressed a trembling kiss to Lucas's forehead. Daniel's heart hammered. Every piece on the chessboard was moving at someone else's command. He realized the law could not protect him from betrayal, especially when it came from those closest to him. The gavel hovered, the silence in the room stretching thinner and thinner. Daniel opened his eyes. He said, "The defense is ready." His words echoed, empty and haunted. The trial had truly begun, and every soul in that room knew the world would not be the same. The prosecution wasted no time. Margaret stood, her heels clicking sharply on the marble as she moved to the evidence table. She said, "Your Honor, the photographs show the defendant at a location inconsistent with his sworn statement." A hush rippled through the room. Daniel's chest tightened. He watched as the first photo, Martin beside a neon-lit bar, time-stamped, flashed on the courtroom monitor. The jurors leaned in, murmuring. Judge Marlowe's expression hardened. Daniel rose and said, "Objection. This evidence hasn't been authenticated." Margaret countered, "It will be. The date and location are clear, and the witness is ready." Daniel locked eyes with Martin, who stared down, face drained of color. In the gallery, Rachel shook her head in disbelief. The judge replied, "The court will allow it, pending verification." Daniel felt the walls closing in, the strategy slipping from his fingers. The enemy was not just across the aisle, it was the evidence itself, a silent traitor. The witness stand creaked as a new figure entered, Officer Jalen Price, tall, mid-30s, crisp uniform. Margaret said, "Officer Price, describe how and where you found the evidence." Jalen replied, "It was recovered during a routine sweep near the crime scene, discarded in a trash bin, wrapped in plastic." Daniel's pen hovered above his notes, scribbling furiously. "Were there fingerprints?" he called out. Jalen nodded, "Yes, partial prints, matching the defendant's." A collective shudder moved through the jury box. Martin looked lost, lips parted in silent protest. Daniel asked, "Could the evidence have been tampered with?" Jalen's face tensed. "It's possible, but the chain of custody is intact." Margaret's lips tightened, satisfied. The judge wrote in her ledger. Daniel glanced at the evidence, a cold certainty settling in his gut. The case was becoming a labyrinth, every new detail a twist, every answer another knot. Margaret called, "Let the record show, partial prints matched the accused." Daniel's world shrank to the thrum of his pulse. He forced a calm he didn't feel. He said, "Your Honor, we request an independent analysis. The prints alone are not conclusive." Judge Marlowe nodded. "Request is granted. The defense will have 48 hours to review." Margaret's gaze lingered, unreadable. Martin slumped forward, head in hands, whispering, "I didn't touch anything." Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth, watching her husband wage war against facts she could not interpret. The court reporter's fingers danced over her keys, capturing every detail. Outside, thunder rumbled, a storm brewing. Daniel fought to control his breathing. Every instinct screamed at him to dig deeper, to not trust what lay on the surface. The courtroom lights flickered. Somewhere fate was turning the screws, and Daniel knew it was only the beginning. Rain hammered against the tall windows as the prosecution moved on. Margaret said, "We have a witness who saw the defendant leave the bar." Daniel's stomach twisted. The doors opened. A woman entered, soaked umbrella in hand. Melissa Grant, barmaid, late 20s, blonde hair streaked with rain. She settled into the witness box, gaze flickering nervously. "Did you see Mr. Ridge the night in question?" Margaret asked. Melissa nodded, voice wavering. "Yes, I saw him leave just after midnight." Daniel rose. "Are you certain it was him?" Melissa hesitated, glancing at Martin. "Pretty sure. He left in a hurry." The jurors scribbled notes, their faces shadows in the gray light. Daniel pressed, "Did you see who he was with?" Melissa shook her head. "No, he was alone." The rain intensified. Daniel read her fear, a fear that seemed to run deeper than simple memory. Secrets, he thought, always leak. A short recess was called. Daniel slipped into the hallway, running trembling hands through his hair. Rain pounded the roof. Rachel appeared, face pinched with worry. She said, "Do you believe her?" Daniel shook his head. "Something's off. She's scared." Rachel reached for his hand, grounding him. "You'll find the truth," she said, voice trembling. Daniel peered through the door's glass pane. Margaret paced the aisle, conferring with Officer Price. Martin sat alone, staring at the table as if the weight of the world had pinned him there. Daniel exhaled, a shiver crawling up his spine. The law, he realized, was a theater of shadows. He resolved to dig deeper, to find the crack in the prosecution's case, even if it meant risking everything. The bell rang, calling all back to the stage. Daniel squared his shoulders, ready to step into the storm once more. As court resumed, Daniel pored over every page of the new evidence. Each photograph, each time-stamped receipt, every blurry figure in the background, he searched for a lifeline. Margaret watched him, the corners of her mouth turning ever so slightly in a private victory. Judge Marlowe said, "Mr. Shaw, do you wish to cross-examine?" Daniel stood, the weight of exhaustion in his bones. "Yes, Your Honor." He approached Officer Price, voice low but steely. "Did you see anyone else near the bar that night?" Officer Price replied, "No, sir. Only the accused on camera." Daniel pressed, "No other witnesses, no blind spots?" The officer hesitated. "There were shadows. The footage isn't perfect." Daniel seized the opening, "So there's room for doubt." A murmur moved through the room. Margaret's jaw flexed in annoyance. Daniel, battered but unbowed, felt the first flicker of hope. A shadow could be a friend to the desperate. In the hallway after court, Daniel cornered Melissa Grant. Rain still clung to her hair, her fingers trembling as she clutched her purse. Daniel said, "Melissa, you hesitated on the stand. Are you sure about what you saw?" Melissa's voice cracked. I don't know. I was tired. There was a man in a dark coat outside. He scared me. Maybe it wasn't Martin. Daniel's eyes widened, feeling the first stirrings of real doubt. "Why didn't you mention that?" he asked. She glanced away, fear etched in her features. "I was told not to complicate things." Daniel's gut twisted. By whom? Melissa hesitated but didn't answer. The door creaked. Margaret appeared at the end of the hall, her gaze cold as steel. Melissa shrank back. Daniel realized the forces arrayed against him were more tangled and more dangerous than he dared to imagine. Night fell. Daniel's office was a pool of lamplight in the darkness. Files and legal pads covered his desk, coffee gone cold at his elbow. He dialed a number. "Harvey, I need a favor. Find security footage from outside the bar, midnight onward." Harvey's voice crackled through. "You think there's something they missed?" Daniel replied, "I know there is. The timeline doesn't add up." He hung up, staring at a photo of Rachel and Lucas taped to his monitor. Exhaustion threatened to swamp him, but he forced himself upright. The law felt less like a shield and more like a maze, one he was being hunted inside. He sifted through every detail, desperate for a thread to pull. Outside, wind rattled the window. Daniel whispered, "There's always something." Somewhere in the chaos the truth was hiding, and he was running out of time to find it. Early morning, Daniel arrived at the courthouse bleary-eyed, tie crooked, determination burning in his chest. He met Harvey outside. Harvey said, "You were right. Security footage shows a second figure, tall, heavy coat, face obscured, leaving minutes after Martin." Daniel's heart pounded. "Can you enhance it?" Harvey shrugged. "The quality's poor, but it's something." Daniel gripped his friend's arm. "That's enough, thank you." Inside, Daniel pressed the new footage into an evidence envelope, hope warring with dread. As he passed the gallery, he caught Rachel's eye. She mouthed, "Don't give up." Daniel's resolve hardened. This was the break he needed, the beginning of a new line of attack. He realized that even in darkness, there was always a glimmer. Sometimes you just had to fight until dawn. Court convened again, tension razor sharp. Daniel approached the bench, voice strong. Your Honor, the defense submits new video evidence. Margaret's lips thinned, nostrils flaring. The monitor flickered to life, showing the grainy image. A second figure in a heavy coat slipping from the shadows, face hidden, moments after Martin left the bar. Murmurs erupted. Daniel said, "This individual was never identified. The prosecution's narrative is incomplete." Judge Marlowe raised a hand for silence, eyes burning into Margaret. Margaret countered, "This doesn't exonerate your client, Mr. Shaw." Daniel replied, "No, but it raises doubt." The jury leaned in, drawn to the new mystery. Daniel caught Rachel's proud, tearful smile. The courtroom, once cold and certain, now pulsed with new uncertainty. For the first time, Daniel sensed the momentum shifting, if only by a fraction. The courtroom air grew electric as Daniel pressed his advantage. "Your Honor, I request a recess to identify the unknown figure in the video." Judge Marlowe studied him, the flicker of curiosity in her stern eyes. Margaret protested, "The prosecution objects. This is a diversion." Daniel shot back, "The truth isn't a diversion." The judge nodded, recess granted. "I expect answers, Mr. Shaw." As the gavel struck, Daniel rushed from the room, heart pounding. Outside, Harvey waited by his car. Daniel said, "We need to know who that is, fast." Harvey nodded. "I'll enhance the footage and run facial recognition." Daniel felt the weight of hope and dread settle on his shoulders. Inside, Rachel watched Daniel's exit, her faith fragile but alive. The tide was turning, but Daniel sensed danger. The closer he got to the truth, the sharper the knives felt against his back. He wondered, for the first time, who he really trusted. Harvey's office became a war room. Screens glowed as grainy images sharpened, frame by frame. Harvey muttered, "Give me a minute. This system's running hot." Daniel paced, nerves fraying. Suddenly, the image resolved. A man with a heavy scar across his cheek, partially obscured, but unmistakable. Daniel's breath caught. He recognized him. It was Victor Hale, an ex-cop with a reputation for dirty work, a man Daniel once trusted with his own secrets. Harvey said, "You know him?" Daniel's face darkened. "Yes, he worked for me years ago, until I exposed him." The betrayal stung deeper than any wound. Daniel whispered, "If Victor's involved, this goes deeper than I thought." Harvey looked up, fear flickering in his eyes. The truth wasn't just a twist in the case. It was a dagger pointed at Daniel's past, his life, and everything he'd fought for. Daniel returned to court, pulse racing. Margaret watched him with a calculating calm. He said, "Your Honor, the defense has identified the unknown figure as Victor Hale, a former police officer with ties to both myself and the prosecution's office." The courtroom buzzed. Margaret's eyes flashed, anger, or was it fear? Judge Marlowe demanded, "Does the prosecution acknowledge this connection?" Margaret hesitated, then said, "Victor Hale was once retained as a consultant, but his involvement in this case is news to us." Daniel pressed, "Victor was dismissed for misconduct. His presence raises questions about evidence integrity." The judge's gavel cracked. "We will investigate. This court does not tolerate corruption." Daniel locked eyes with Margaret. The rules had changed. What began as a legal battle was now a fight for truth itself. In the gallery, Rachel squeezed Lucas's hand, her faith in Daniel rekindled by the unraveling conspiracy. In the tense aftermath, Daniel cornered Margaret in a quiet corridor. "How deep does this go?" he demanded. Margaret's mask slipped. She said, "I didn't know about Victor's involvement, Daniel. But you're not the only one with secrets." He pressed, "Are you protecting him or yourself?" Margaret looked away, jaw tight. "I'm protecting the law, or what's left of it." Daniel's anger flared. Someone planted evidence. Someone wants Martin to fall, maybe to get at me. Margaret whispered, "This isn't just about your client, Daniel. We're all being played." For the first time, Daniel saw Margaret's fear. They were adversaries, but both were caught in something bigger and darker. The truth wasn't just hidden, it was dangerous. Margaret said, "Find Victor before he finds you." The words hung in the air, an unspoken truce between bitter rivals turned uneasy allies. That night Daniel found his car tires slashed, a note tucked beneath the wiper, "Stop digging." His blood chilled. He scanned the shadowy lot, every parked car a threat. He called Rachel, "Lock the doors, don't open for anyone." Rachel's voice trembled. "What's happening?" Daniel kept his tone steady. "Just trust me." He slipped the note into his pocket, determination hardening. Back in his apartment, Daniel barricaded the door and watched the city lights flicker, heart racing. The law was no shield now. The hunt had become personal. He knew Victor was close, closer than the courts, closer than the law. Daniel gripped the steering wheel of his life, refusing to let go. Betrayal had found its way out of the courtroom and into his home. The rules were gone. The only thing left was the truth, and the danger waiting in its shadow. Morning arrived harsh and colorless. Daniel paced outside the courthouse, every footstep echoing with dread and determination. Harvey called. "I've traced Victor's last location. He was seen at a motel on 4th Street. Daniel replied, "Send me everything." As he entered the courtroom, Margaret was already there, visibly shaken. Judge Marlowe called them forward. Daniel said, "Your Honor, the defense requests Victor Hale be subpoenaed immediately." Margaret surprised him, adding, "The prosecution supports this request." Judge Marlowe's voice was flint. "Subpoena granted. We will uncover the truth." The gallery buzzed. Daniel and Margaret exchanged a look. Adversaries turned allies, if only for a moment. For the first time, Daniel saw fear on Margaret's face, a mirror of his own. The truth was coming for them all, and there was nowhere left to hide. Daniel gripped the table, bracing for impact. Victor was brought in, handcuffed, unshaven, his scar stark under the courtroom lights. Silence stretched. Judge Marlowe said, "Mr. Hale, you are ordered to testify." Daniel asked, "Were you present at the bar the night Martin Ridge was arrested?" Victor's gaze flickered, defiant. "Yes. I was following an order." Margaret leaned forward. "Whose order?" Victor's mouth twitched. "A name you all know." Daniel pressed, "Did you plant evidence?" Victor's eyes darkened. "I did what I had to. Someone wanted Ridge out of the way." The jury whispered. Daniel's heart pounded. Victor shot Daniel a venomous glare. "You think you're better? You sold me out first." Daniel steadied his voice. "This isn't about us." Judge Marlowe's gavel struck. "Names, now." Victor looked at the prosecution table, lips curling into a bitter smile. "You already know." The courtroom exploded in outrage. Margaret's hands shook as she rifled through her files. Daniel caught her eye, the old rivalry eclipsed by shared fear. Margaret said, "Your Honor, the prosecution moves to open an internal investigation." The judge nodded. "Granted. This case has been compromised by more than one hand." Victor sneered, "You can dig all you want. The rot goes all the way up." Daniel felt the world tilt. What had begun as a fight for one man's innocence was now a battle against a whole corrupted system. Rachel, in the gallery, watched Daniel's shoulders stiffen. He turned, searching the faces in the courtroom for a sign, someone who cared as much as he did. Harvey texted, "Check your email, found something big." Daniel felt hope ignite. The entire courtroom buzzed with the knowledge that secrets had finally begun to leak. The fight was no longer just his, it belonged to everyone who believed in justice. Daniel ducked into the hallway, phone trembling in his hand as he opened Harvey's email. The subject line read, "Proof." Attached was a grainy security cam still, Victor and a senior prosecutor late at night, passing the same evidence envelope seen in court. Daniel's breath caught. It was all there, time, date, faces. He returned to the courtroom, voice strong, "Your Honor, I move to admit new evidence." The judge reviewed the image, her face ashen. Margaret whispered, "That's Chief Prosecutor Weller." The courtroom erupted. Judge Marlowe ordered silence, then said, "An emergency hearing will be convened." Margaret's face crumpled. Relief, fear, vindication, all at once. Daniel knew this was the break that could shatter the entire conspiracy. But as eyes turned to him, he realized exposing the truth might destroy more than reputations. It might destroy lives. The emergency hearing began within the hour. Weller was called in, face pale, voice trembling, as the damning footage played for all. Daniel said, "Why frame Martin Ridge?" Weller stammered, We needed a conviction. Pressure from above." Margaret said, "You risked everything. Why?" Weller broke, "To save my career. I never thought it would go this far." Judge Marlowe's gavel thundered. "This court is adjourned pending criminal investigation." As the room emptied, Daniel stood motionless, drained. The truth had come out, but the cost was steep. He caught Rachel's gaze through the chaos. Her eyes shimmered with pride and sadness. Margaret approached, her voice a whisper. "You did what was right, Daniel, even when it hurt." Daniel nodded, feeling both victorious and broken. Justice had demanded everything, and left no one unscathed. The courthouse was nearly empty when Daniel finally stepped outside, rain soft against the marble steps. News vans clustered at the curb, reporters eager, cameras waiting. Margaret stood beside him, silent, sharing the weight of victory and loss. Rachel approached, Lucas holding tight to her hand. Rachel said, "You did it." Daniel managed a tired smile. "Justice isn't victory, it's survival." Margaret's phone buzzed. The district attorney's office was already moving on Weller and Victor. Daniel looked at her. "You'll testify?" Margaret nodded. "We both will." In the hush before the cameras, Daniel realized this wasn't the end, only a reckoning. The system was wounded, but not dead. Lucas looked up, hope flickering in his young eyes. Daniel crouched. No matter how dark, the truth matters. As the first camera lights flickered on, Daniel felt the first fragile sense of peace since the trial began. The following day, headlines screamed of corruption, scandal, and redemption. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, sunlight breaking through rain-streaked windows. Lucas and Rachel laughed softly in the next room, the sound delicate and warm. Daniel scrolled through messages, thank yous, threats, demands for interviews. His hands trembled as he read one from a young lawyer. "Because of you, I still believe in the law." Daniel closed his eyes, tears stinging. The price had been steep, but something good remained. Rachel came in, coffee in hand, her presence grounding. She said, "You lost a lot, Daniel, but you never lost yourself." He took the mug, squeezing her hand. "I almost did," he whispered. In the quiet, Daniel understood that justice is never clean, but it's always worth the fight. The morning brought a fragile promise, a world not yet healed, but finally awake. Margaret sat alone in her office, the late afternoon sun casting gold across stacks of legal folders. She reviewed her testimony statement, hands shaking. Her career teetered on a knife edge, but her conscience felt lighter than it had in years. Her assistant entered, whispering, "The Da wants to see you." Margaret nodded, smoothing her suit, finding the courage Daniel's resolve had inspired. She walked past her framed diplomas, each a reminder of what the law once meant to her. Pausing at her office window, she stared at the city below. Margaret said to herself, "I won't run from the truth again." Gathering her files, she stepped into the corridor, heading toward an uncertain future. In her quiet resolve, she understood that the law was broken, but people like Daniel and herself could still mend it, piece by fragile piece. Martin Ridge, at last exonerated, stood in front of the courthouse in the rain, his hands shaking but free. Daniel met him at the steps. Martin said, "Thank you. You believed in me when no one else would." Daniel replied, "You deserve the truth." Cameras flashed, reporters calling Martin's name. Rachel waited nearby, tears of relief streaming down her face. Martin looked at the sky, rain washing his face, years of fear and suspicion dissolving. "What will you do now?" Daniel asked. Martin smiled faintly, live, for the first time in years. They shook hands, a silent bond forged in the fire of injustice. Daniel watched as Martin walked away into the rain, not looking back. In that moment, Daniel realized that sometimes justice is a beginning, not an end, and that hope can survive even the darkest betrayal. Night fell, and the courthouse stood empty. Daniel returned for one last look, standing alone in the echoing hall. He touched the cold marble pillar, remembering every moment. The victories, the betrayals, the sacrifices. The place felt different now, shadows less menacing, silence less heavy. In the distance, Judge Marlowe's voice echoed, "Justice is not a destination, Mr. Shaw. It's a direction." Daniel smiled, a weary acceptance settling in. He turned, walking out into the night, the city's lights glittering beyond the courthouse doors. He knew the future would hold more battles, more scars, but also more hope. As he stepped into the darkness, Daniel felt lighter, not because the burden was gone, but because he'd chosen to carry it, no matter the cost. The courtroom would remember him, and so would the world he'd dared to change. Weeks later, the city's noise returned to normal, but the memory of the trial haunted every corner of Daniel's life. He sat in a modest restaurant, coffee cooling between his palms. A young lawyer approached, hesitating. She said, "Mr. Shaw, your case. It changed everything for me. People said the system couldn't change, but you proved them wrong." Daniel managed a quiet smile. Justice isn't about winning, it's about not giving up, even when the world calls you a fool for trying. The lawyer nodded, inspired. Daniel watched her walk out into the street, hope in her stride. Rachel joined him, warmth in her gaze. She whispered, "I missed this, the man who fights, even when he's broken." Daniel squeezed her hand, feeling the quiet strength between them. The world had tried to bend him, but the truth had held him upright. Some victories, he realized, could never be taken away. On a rainy afternoon, Daniel visited Martin, who was rebuilding his life with quiet resolve. Martin greeted him at the door of a modest apartment, a shy smile on his lips. Inside, laughter echoed as Martin's family gathered for dinner. Martin said, "I owe you my freedom." Daniel shook his head. "You owed the world your truth. I just helped you say it loud enough to be heard." They shared a brief embrace, a bond formed through fire. As Daniel left, Martin's little daughter waved, innocence shining in her eyes. The rain eased, sunlight piercing gray clouds. Daniel walked home, feeling for the first time that his fight had meaning beyond the courtroom. Justice, he realized, was found in the small moments. Dinner tables, children's laughter, second chances. The law could be cold, but people could bring it back to life. Margaret sat before the internal review board, nerves coiled tight. She spoke clearly. "I failed to see what was happening. I let ambition cloud my judgment, but I will not be silent again." The board listened in stony silence, pens scratching paper. Margaret's honesty startled them. She owned her mistakes, her gaze never wavering. When the verdict came, her job preserved but with oversight, she nodded in gratitude. Later, she met Daniel outside the courthouse, rain pattering on the pavement. "I thought this would end me," she admitted. Daniel replied, "Sometimes it's the end of who we were, not who we can become." Margaret smiled. A weight lifted. In that moment, they were no longer adversaries but survivors, each choosing to heal, not just win. Margaret turned to face the future, ready to repair what she once helped break. Night descended as Daniel sat alone in his study, surrounded by case files, and the soft hum of city life beyond his window. He thumbed through a folder labeled Ridge, then closed it for good. Outside, Rachel and Lucas decorated the living room, laughter bubbling through the door. Daniel paused, listening, the sound filling cracks left by years of conflict. He whispered to himself, "Let the world remember, truth outlasts betrayal." The city lights glowed, indifferent to his battles, but Daniel felt their beauty in a new way. He opened the door and joined his family, the weight of justice lighter at last. His legacy would not be a victory in court, but the courage to keep fighting, even in the darkest hour. The world was imperfect, but his world, in this moment, was enough. In the final moments before dawn, Daniel stood by his window, watching the city wake. The scars of the trial remained, but they had become part of him, proof that he had not turned away when it mattered most. A single line echoed in his mind, words spoken by Judge Marlowe. "The price of truth is everything, and nothing at all." Daniel pressed a palm to the glass, the city's heartbeat merging with his own. Behind him, Rachel embraced him, Lucas' laughter dancing down the hall. The silence was not empty now, it was full, heavy with all that had been risked and won. Daniel whispered, "Let them remember. The world outside would keep spinning, indifferent, but in this house, the legacy of truth endured." And as the first light spilled across the city, Daniel finally allowed himself to let go.